All right. Hello, everybody. This is Haley Glover from Lumina Foundation. I'm joined by Laura Couturier, Project Director at Jobs for the Future and one of our Community Partnership for Attainment liaisons. She is going to lead a webinar today about strategies for institutional engagement. This is something we featured pretty heavily at our convening back in January, but is also something that's come up any number of times, and I asked Laura if she might want to take a little bit of a deeper dive and answer some questions and identify some real tactical, practical strategies for getting institutions to become active and critical stakeholders in the work, not only partners that are just about the credentialing side of the house. So we're going to ask you to do a couple things during this webinar, and we'll see how they go. On the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a little box that has a dialog box with a check in it. At certain points in this conversation, Laura's going to ask you to sort of raise your hands or hit the check mark. If you scroll down to that little check mark and hit a yes or no, that check or X, we'll be able to see it and can do sort of a real-time voting. So if you could just wait for those points in the presentation and act accordingly, that would be super. Also, I would very much encourage you to ask any questions you have via the chat or Q&A box. I'll facilitate those. And whatever we don't get to during this presentation, I'll follow up with you directly, because we'll know who asked what. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Laura, and I know that she is committing to wanting to run as interactive a webinar as possible, because that is her style. And so would really encourage you to break in at any point and ask questions as you will. So, all right, Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Haley. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Excellent, thanks. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. And before I get started, I just want to reiterate what Haley just said. We have all been on some pretty deadly dull webinars over the course of the past couple years, and so I would love to work against putting you all to sleep here at 2:30 in the afternoon. So to the extent that you all would like to interrupt with questions, I beg of you to please do so. You can send us chats and we will monitor as we go so that we are breaking this up a little bit as much as possible. So my name is Laura Couturier, and I am a coach for Lumina's Community Partnership for Attainment work. It's a real honor. I have a great group of communities that I'm loving working with. And I also am a program director for Jobs for the Future, and have spent the better part of the past 2 decades working in what many refer to as, quote unquote, the college completion movement. And so I spend a lot of my life on college campuses and working with state-level partners on how to engage campuses in statewide initiatives around dramatically improving success for students in our colleges. And so, you know, I want to be really honest with you all. There's no perfect answer. There's no magic bullet. There's no research base for this conversation. It's really just talking from experience, but we're going to try to be as concrete today as we can about what are some strategies for you all to take home and hopefully really be able to engage your college and university partners. So as Haley noted, you know, one of the things that we're trying here is to ask you all a couple of questions as we go to hopefully, I think I just lost, there we go, to hopefully keep folks engaged in the conversation. So the first question is, okay, so in your bottom right, there's a little check mark, and if you go to it, you can choose yes. Or no. So please choose yes if you think your local community is experiencing especially poor student outcomes. And that could be in any number of ways that you might feel that you have an especially high percentage of your students who are not transitioning into college-level courses, so they are testing into developmental education as they move from high school to college. It could be that you are really astonished by how low your community college graduation or transfer rates are. So please go ahead and check a yes if you think that your local community has especially low outcomes. So I'm going to give you a chance to do that, and I'm going to keep talking, and I'll come back to that question. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of context setting about why did we think we ought to have this conversation, and what are we hearing as we're working with our communities in community partnership for attainment? What are the coaches and the Lumina Foundation and our friends at DCA hearing from the communities? And so it's kind of an interesting split. And before I talk about it, I want to say, this conversation about how to have effective engagement across institutional lines is an endemic conversation to absolutely everything. We could have the same conversation in healthcare. We could have the same conversation about, K-12 and administrators. We do in the field all the time have the same conversation about employers. So, it's always hard to figure out how to, cross the aisle, break down institutional barriers, make friends with people you've never met, and build an effective and productive relationship. And so there's nothing, I think, about, this question of how to engage in higher ed institutions that is really that different from a similar conversation we could have in almost any industry sector. But within Lumina, within the Community Partnership for Attainment, we hear, I'm calling it a tale of two CPA cities, because we do hear both sides of the equation. The colleges themselves might feel like, gosh, I'm hearing from this backbone organization, and the person that runs the backbone organization has actually spent their whole life in K-12, and they don't really understand what it is I do on a university campus. And on the other side of the equation, what we hear a lot of is that the backbone organizations feel like their colleges are really large, impenetrable bureaucracies, that they're not engaged in the community-wide mission to improve student completion, that they, a very, very common complaint is that colleges move way too slowly, that, this is such a frustrating pace of glacial change. And so these are all really common complaints. And it's what led us to feel like, it would be a good idea to go ahead and see if we can't help folks with this really difficult conversation. So Haley is doing a terrific job at monitoring things. So thank you, Haley. And she says that all but one of you checked yes, that you feel that your local community is really experiencing especially bad student outcomes. So, so first of all, thank you so much for actually answering the question. I'm thrilled that you're engaging. Thank you so much. But I have good news and I have bad news for you. The good news is you're in better company than you think with your low outcomes. And the bad news is that I think it's probably highly unlikely that the outcomes you're experiencing are, in fact, that much worse than other communities around the country. And so, I've heard a lot in my work with CPA, folks saying, for example, you just can't believe how bad our community college graduation rates are. And unfortunately, I can. It is not at all uncommon for us to see three-year graduation rates from community colleges that hover between 6% and 9%. The national estimate of the percentage of high school graduates who test into developmental education ranges between 60 and 70%. And so we really have a lot of work to do nationally. And so, the good news for you is you probably are in good company and your community might not be as bad off as you think. But the bad news is that we clearly have a lot of work to do. And so we're really glad you all are engaged in this conversation, because across the nation, we've really got to get this right. So let me talk a little bit about what has informed my thoughts today on how to move forward with thinking about institutional engagement. And I want to start with a big pronouncement, which is that for us to be successful in an initiative called Community Partnership for Attainment, where the focus is on improving college attainment levels, the institutions have to be engaged. It's really not an option for the institutions not to be more than just at the table, but to be active participants in this work. So the college completion movement, quote unquote, there really is technically no such thing, but we talk a lot about this, quote unquote college completion movement. And you could periodize it in many different ways, but people generally agree that we've been, at this work for over a decade. And we have learned a lot in that decade. And unfortunately, we have not changed the numbers dramatically. We have not seen increases in college graduation rates. We have seen successes at individual institutions, but we have not been able to move the needle across the country. And so we've been doing a lot of work recently on saying, okay, it's been a decade, so let's step back and think about what are some of the key lessons we've learned and how do we move forward. And so one of the biggest things we've learned is that pilots around student success will never meet the scope of the challenge before us. We are faced with very low college completion rates, and we have many, many lost points in our pipeline where we are losing our students. And over the past decade, we have done a lot of terrific work, and it was the right work at the right time, around experimenting with different interventions that we thought might really help students. And so we have, for example, created student success courses that students take when they enter the college to orient them to what does it mean to be a student? How do you manage your time? How do you use the library? We have created learning communities where we brought students together around cohorts. We have experimented with different means of delivering advising and tutoring. We have redesigned how we teach courses. And all of that work was terrific. But what we found was that it was often designed at a small scale, and that we might have had a terrific impact on 20 students. And that's great for those 20 students, but it's never going to meet the challenge in front of us. And so that's a really important point in this conversation about why we need the institutions to be really engaged, is that small efforts from the side of colleges aren't going to get us where we need to be. We need really to engage the institutions themselves in taking on major transformative efforts. Another big learning, this is a huge, huge lesson, and it will be no surprise to anybody, but there is no silver bullet. There is no one thing that we can do that's going to dramatically change student outcomes. We've tried it all, folks, I promise you. We have tried performance-based funding. We have tried completely redesigning developmental education. We have taken on huge focused projects, and at the end of them found that we didn't change student outcomes. And so a huge learning over the past decade, and the research on this is very compelling and very clear, is that approaching an issue this big from just one angle, you're just never going to get your hands around the elephant, if you will, and that we've really got to think about integrating multiple interventions, and that if we tackle the delivery of developmental education at the same time that we tackle the way that we advise students, at the same time that we offer more tutoring, at the same time that we try to meet students' financial needs, if we do all of that, then we actually do see an increase and an improvement in student outcomes. And so this is another really big message for today's webinar is, again, there's no one thing that can be done. We really need the interventions to have, a vision and to be integrated and to be multi-pronged. So all to say that, I think one of the biggest things is, given the low completion rates we have, we really need many of our colleges to transform. And so that's why we need them at the table so desperately. And that's why we have got to find a way to be working very concretely with colleges. Now, I'm sure many of you are working with a lot of your colleges. I'm sure you have very robust relationships with many of them. But I will tell you that, I have heard communities say, I did go and meet with somebody at such and such university, and they really just weren't interested, and we've never been able to get traction. Or even, they were actually really nasty, and we just haven't even tried to reach out to them again. So we do know through those conversations that there are, some real issues going on around this college engagement piece. And so we're hoping that today's webinar will help with that. So I'm going to ask you another question, which is, please click on yes again if you're from a community that is at this point having an issue with engaging one or more of your colleges in the attainment work. I'd be curious to see how many of the folks on this webinar are in fact having an issue with the colleges in their community. So I'm going to keep moving, but if you can go ahead and click on that. And I'm going to talk to you about some good news, because I think I've been a little negative thus far. And I want to tell you that all is not lost. There is great news ahead for this agenda. For one thing, there is so much pressure on colleges to improve their student graduation rates and their attainment rates. There is enormous pressure coming from the federal government, from local and state governments, from foundations, from the national news media, and in fact, from their peers. So the tenor of the national conversation in higher education has shifted. And if you go to a conference that is focused on higher education and where the attendees are all from colleges and universities, you will hear people saying, this is no longer acceptable, we have to change. We are changing at our campus, and we can tell you that we are doing things that work, no more excuses. So there is really good news that there is actually a huge movement afoot among colleges and universities to get very involved in improving their outcomes. And there are, in fact, a number of ways that colleges are getting involved in strategically focusing on improving completion. So some have joined national initiatives. The Lumina Foundation was a key player that kicked off Achieving the Dream back in 2004. There are now over 200 community colleges involved in Achieving the Dream, dramatically focused on improving student outcomes. And then, we actually hear a lot in the field from institutions that say, I'm not involved in an initiative, but that's okay. I'm doing this on my own time and my own dime because I know it's the right thing to do, because I can't look at these student outcomes and sleep at night anymore, now that this conversation has kind of helped me to see the importance. So we are seeing a lot of colleges shifting and strategically focusing. The other really great news is that we know so much more than we did 10 years ago. The level of research that has gone on over the past 10 years about what matters to student success is pretty incredible. The foundations and the federal government have poured money into very high quality, highly rigorous research that we can now stand on the shoulders of and have a much more sophisticated understanding about what matters to student success and how should we move forward. And the other piece of good news is that the colleges need you all. And there's a really, I think, growing national conversation about colleges not being isolated anymore and needing to have robust relationships with K-12 and needing to have robust relationships with employers. And so folks like you all in CPA who are living in these backbone organizations and trying to bring folks to the table, you're a real opportunity for the colleges in your community because they need this type of interaction and they know they need it. They just might not, just like you don't know perhaps how to reach out to them, they might not know how to reach out to you, and they might not know how to reach out to their employers. In fact, I'd be almost willing to bet that they don't know how to reach out to their employers. It's something that colleges are historically really bad at, employer engagement. And so the good news, I think, is that you guys are in a place of, you're in a sweet spot that the colleges need and are looking for, and that we can leverage that. So Haley has...
Laura, can I break in and ask you a couple of questions?
Please do.
Okay, so I'm seeing some feedback that the level of engagement success really varies dramatically by college, that some are very involved, others are not. And I think that's pretty reasonable because people are involved and they're not, and that's a lot of it's driven by personality or the general mission of the institution. In your experience, which institutions have been the most receptive to change and the least receptive to change, and why do you think that's the case?
Boy, that's a good question, Haley. If I can flip the question a little bit, I'll say that I think so much of this depends on the leadership, and that the involvement, the willingness to say we're going to dramatically overhaul this institution hinges a lot on a dynamic leader who's willing to take risks. And so we have seen change at all levels and all types of institutions, and I think it really is typically driven by senior leadership who are willing to put their neck on the line a bit. Beyond that, I will say that I think that the most change as a sector has happened in the community college sector, and I would say that that is for a number of reasons. One is that as the knowledge economy really took root and people started thinking and talking in terms of a knowledge economy and recognizing the need to have more workers in our economy with post-secondary skills, there was a realization that the only affordable way to do that would be to bring more students through our community college doors. And in fact, a pretty significant percentage of our workers need sub-baccalaureate credentials, not baccalaureate credentials, and so that's a part of that equation. And so there's been a really strong spotlight on the community colleges as the driver of our economic engine and as a place for, a significant influx of students so that we can pull them through and get them credentials. But at the same time, then that put the spotlight also on community college outcomes. And they are, on the whole, the sector for community college outcomes are much lower than for other sectors. There are hundreds of reasons for that, and we could probably debate all day what they are. I think I'm a historian by training. I think a lot of it comes from our mission. The community college mission has always been to kind of be all things to all people and to be an open door, open access institution. And for, the better part of half of a decade or, half of a century there, people held that up as, a point of real pride. And what we didn't realize was that in fact, that being all things to all people and coming and going was working against our students. And that the huge majority of our students come in the door saying they want a credential and they want to transfer. 80% of students who enter community college doors say they want to transfer. The idea that community colleges are there for students to come and take one class, while not untrue, has been very much exaggerated in the kind of lore around community colleges. And when you actually look at the data around what students themselves say they want to do, it's not to come in and leave again after one class. And so, so I think that that data has helped the community colleges to rethink their mission and think about how they have approached the services that they offer to students and the way that they structure their courses. It's been very loose. It's been, come, you know, choose what you want to do. It's been a point of pride. You know, we offer 10,000 courses. That's, you know, sort of liberal arts by osmosis. And I don't think, I really think people did it with the right intentions, but we have now seen the results, and the results are very, very low completion rates. Does that answer your question?
No, actually, I think it's a great answer, and I want to put out a note or two. So we're having a pretty frank conversation that obviously we're talking in generalities about the institutions involved. We're not trying to paint all with the same brush. Let me just put that out there at first. So there are some community colleges, some colleges that are doing exceptional work and should really be highlighted, and I'm going to ask you to do that in just a little bit, Laura, given your experience. But we talked a little bit about leadership as an effective sort of tool in the toolkit, right? You're not going to probably get traction within an institution if it's not led by somebody who's willing to look at the reform and say that might be for me. But what about the role of policy from either the state or from within a funder, a funding sort of unit, either from the community or from the regents or any other structure that might be governing the college?
Excellent question, Haley. So this is where this is my real passion, is policy. It's where I spend most of my time, so I'm happy to talk about it. So I think that we actually need to pause and think about a new approach to policy. I work with a woman named Gretchen Schmidt, who I will always attribute this quote to, but I love it. And if any of you know Gretchen, you will laugh when you hear it. She says, "There is no stick big enough to beat every college in this country into the college completion movement." And I love that saying. And, you know, it's true. So we want policy to keep pushing institutions to be more accountable. But we also want policy to support institutions that are trying to do right by their students. And there is a sizable and growing group of colleges in this country that are really trying to transform, that are living in state policy environments that they're often bumping up against. And so we're really trying to change the policy conversation to say there really need to be kind of two prongs to the approach. One around recognizing that for the institutions that are trying to do right by their students, they live in policy environments that are often quite outdated, you know, that have policies on the books because some guy named Hank, you know, wrote it that way in pencil in 1947. And that, you know, for example, can't change to a multiple measures placement process for their students because there is a policy in place that says you have to use only AccuPlacer and your cut score has to do this. And, you know, so the colleges may be trying to respond to evidence and they can't do it because of existing state policies. So we're trying to push for a multi-pronged conversation around let's work with those institutions that are involved in this completion movement and really support them in the process and then use the sticks to bring everybody else along.
Well, thank you for following up with. I was a little off-put when I heard that quote, I have to say, and then you followed up with it. I understood that, yes, it's about carrots and sticks. That's great. I was like, wait a second, Laura. No, but this is good. So we're going to go on, but I want to note, please do check in and answer, ask your questions, and all of this will continue to break in. But I'm going to ask Laura to start talking a little bit more about what she's seen in terms of how organizations and communities and institutions have been supported by, you know, what are the carrots and sticks involved? How did movement actually happen on the ground? And I think you'll be able to draw from your experience in that way and get to some practical kinds of ideas.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's a great segue into the next slide, which is, you know, before we get into some strategies, I'd love to talk to you all about what I've, for lack of better words, kind of termed principles of engagement, because I do think that there's a difference between some sort of concrete strategies and also some approaches and ways, you know, some mindsets you might use as you go into this process of thinking through how to engage your colleges. So, you know, first of all, I know colleges do seem, they're often huge, and they are, you know, literally sometimes up on a hill, built like fortresses in these big brick or stone buildings. But they're just an organization like any other. And so as you're trying to pull them into your community-wide goals, I would just encourage you to think about it from their shoes as well. I mean, yes, they have their own need to improve attainment rates, but I think you know, if you're going to benefit yourself and your relationship with them if you go into that conversation by thinking through, how can I help this college meet their own goals? So help them to see their own needs in your work. And so I'm going to go into some more strategies in a minute about how you can do that. But I think that's an important mindset. And I would say the same thing to you if you were going to go and have a conversation with employers. How can you help the employers think about, you know, how what you're doing will help them meet their goals? And, you know, there is a value proposition in every one of these conversations. And so for all that they can be these really large bureaucratic institutions, they're also just an organization like any other, where once you find your entry point, it often gets a lot easier. The other thing I would just recommend, and again, this goes for any meeting, but, you know, think about really managing your meetings very well. Make sure that when you bring all of your folks to the table, each meeting is additive. We hear so much, oh, well, we had the exact same conversation as we did last time, or we don't feel like we're making progress. So I would really encourage you to document where a meeting ends. Think about how the conversation might have moved in the intervening months, and start the next meeting reflecting on the progress in that time period and how you're moving forward, so that the colleges and everybody in the room really feel like things are moving along and that the content is additive. Because the colleges, you know, again, like you all, like any other organization, they are called upon to be involved in hundreds of thousands of initiatives, right? And so, you know, keeping in mind that, you know, they have full-time jobs already just like you do, and that they really want to feel like this is something that's moving and that has legs and that has value for them, is going to be important. One thing that we've heard a lot about in CPA is the idea that our communities are often working with large groups of colleges, 10, 17, 25 colleges, and at the table you might have 3 community colleges and, you know, 2 very selective elite universities. And it's really hard sometimes to find the commonality in those conversations. And so we've been trying to think through how can we help folks, you know, have those conversations where an elite institution can see themselves in the work at the same time that a community college can. And I think there are a variety of ways to do this, but, you know, I would encourage you, first of all, to really think about the topic. You know, there are institutions in this country that do not consider themselves to be institutions that offer dev ed. You know, I would argue back that any Comp 101 class probably is dev ed, but that's a different conversation. But, you know, you can still find commonalities that will interest different folks around the table. So you might set up conversations around big topics like college readiness, or around how do we improve financial stability for our low-income students. And, you know, those kinds of topics that are cross-cutting are going to have appeal to all of your institutions. And so I just really encourage you to think through how you structure your agendas and what the topics are, and then how you parse out the different institutions around the table so that they are talking about things that matter to them and they can take home and do work on. Another principle is just, I would really encourage you to be very concrete. Don't be afraid to ask for things. We would like your institution to send a representative to this meeting. We would like your institution to host a career fair. We would like your institution to, invest in a, FAFSA completion day. I would really encourage, give them something to walk away with that they can go home and implement. Another really big question that we hear a lot is, who should I reach out to at a college in my community? This is a tough question. Of course, personalities are different, institutions are different. There's no simple answer. But what I can do is speak to my experience, which is that typically, if you really want big change to happen, you need the president to come to the table first and say, I support this, and I want to see this happen. And then you have to find the worker bee. And that worker bee is not always, but is often the chief academic officer or provost. It's the person who really has credibility with the faculty and has the ability to move an initiative on the campus. And so, again, this is very much speaking in general terms because it will be different locally. And we had a great conversation in Dallas actually about it's often, if it's not the provost, it might be the institutional researcher who has access to data and can really speak to what's happening on campus is another great contact. It might be your Dean of Student Services who is constantly running initiatives and interacting with students and really has a bead on what students need. So, I would encourage you to think outside of the box, but again, just speaking generally from my experience, it is often a chief academic officer who can really push an agenda on a campus. And the last principle I want to say is that I think it's okay for some institutions to not engage at certain times. And so if you're having a lot of trouble with one institution, that might be okay. The depth of change and the commitment and the amount of work that some institutions need to do to really take on the college completion agenda and transform is overwhelming in many cases. It is literally turning the institution upside down in many cases. And so sometimes that work requires circling the wagons first and being inward about, rethinking everything from who the leaders are to how students register for courses, everything. And so if a college is circling the wagons and doing intensive internal work and not engaging externally for a 2 or 3 year period, I actually think that might have to be okay. And that, we have to live in reality and say that the intensity of those on-campus conversations might just require that there not be any external pressure or external noise right now. And, again, just speaking from experience, the level of engagement that's required, for example, with faculty and the types of conversations that need to happen with the faculty about laying out student outcomes, helping them to understand where the lost points are with students, and digging in to redesign literally everything that's happening on a campus, that's the kind of conversation that often has to happen behind closed doors. So, Haley, you might be cringing right now, but I hope not.
I think that's a really great point, Lara, is that, your work is sort of from the community's perspective, right? You're not all, don't have the luxury of being housed at an institution to be able to intimately link the community agenda with the institutional agenda like some of our peers on the ground, right? And for those who are, who really want to work with an institution, sometimes it just doesn't work, and that's got to be okay. You try again. It's like that line from What About Bob, right? It always does come back to that. So thank you for bringing that up, Laura. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the experts in the field say that for an institution to really implement a major transformation, right now in the field, people talk a lot about implementing structured pathways, for example, or guided pathways, that's, roughly a 2 to 3 year endeavor at the very least. You're not going to see outcomes for many years even after that. And that, that's intensive on-campus work. And so, like Haley said, maybe you give them a year and then you check back in. Now, it's not going to be the case everywhere, but I do think, I know that certainly in some of the communities I'm working in, there are colleges that are just really focused inwardly right now. Okay, so getting to some concrete strategies around how to bring colleges to the table that perhaps aren't yet. One thing that I would encourage folks to think about is going back to the earlier principle around thinking through how can you help the colleges to meet their own goals. One way to do that would be to look at some public documents. And if people want to email me offline, I'd be happy to help with this. But find something that's going on in your locality or in your state, whether it's a governor's State of the State address where she says, we are expecting our colleges to increase production of STEM credentials by 50% this year. Or whether it's a new strategic plan, maybe there's a new commissioner of higher education who has put out a new strategic plan. In Virginia, for example, the Virginia Community College System has a plan this year where they have announced publicly that they are going to triple the number of credentials that they produce by 2021. So that's a great leverage point. You want to increase your credentials, and they need to increase their credentials. Those college presidents are going to be evaluated based on the strategic plan and whether or not they meet their credential goals. They can't meet their credential goals if they're not linking up to K-12 and if they're not linking up to employers, and you can provide them that pathway. And so you could literally, call them or send an email saying, I see you have this need. I can help you meet it. Did you know that around my table, I have these 5 employers in your region that are looking for a way to connect with you? Performance-based funding is another, going back to the sticks of policy, performance-based funding, of course, is a huge one. In Ohio, for example, the colleges have moved to 100% performance-based funding. It has really changed the tenor of the conversation in Ohio. The colleges are going to be rewarded on whether or not their students graduate. And so, there are many examples of performance-based funding systems, and there are resources out there that can tell you exactly what's in place in your state and which metrics your colleges are being evaluated on. And again, that would be a way to actually very quickly and easily pull together a value proposition for your colleges and say, I know that this year you as president might lose your job if you don't, produce a bump in student completion. So let's talk. So those are some, concrete ways to leverage things that are happening locally. I would also encourage you to just, go to campuses, not just to invite folks to come to you, but to offer, say outside of this meeting of my team, I'd also like to come and see you. And go to the campus and sit down with them, talk to them one-on-one about what you're doing. So if you're having trouble drawing them in to a bigger meeting, just reach out and, use your human connection to get in the door. Another great way, of course, is to put college representatives on your boards and then require action from them. That's an easy one. I bet most of you are doing that. Sharing data, of course, is another great way to engage your colleges. You guys have access to so much data that they would really love to see. And some of them have it, but not all of them. And so to the extent that you can say, hey, I can get you data from your 5 feeder high schools, or I can, help you to try, I have a data system that we could leverage to run some reports for you. Help them to see different services like that you're doing anyway that can help them and give them information they're looking for. And then, again, the helping them with one of their problems, I think we've talked a lot about this, but I would encourage you to think outside of the box on this too. I was listening to somebody recently talking about how at a college that they were working at, suddenly the enrollments dropped dramatically, and they couldn't figure out why. And then during a cabinet level meeting, somebody said, oh gosh, I can't get here on my bus anymore. And they came to realize that the public transportation system had canceled the bus going out to the campus. And because all the senior leaders were driving their own cars to campus, they had no idea. And so their enrollment numbers plummeted, and they had a real problem. And so, think about how to reach out to your colleges and say, I can help link you to all of these other issues that you might be having. I mean, often you all in CPA have access to the mayor's office. You have access to folks that the colleges really don't. And then there's always the shame factor. So hold a public event and talk about the colleges that are involved in your initiative. Talk about the great things that are going on, and the colleges that aren't mentioned aren't going to like not being mentioned. They're going to want to be profiled. They're going to want to be talked about. And so, raising up the folks that are being good apples will have an impact on those who have not engaged. So, okay, that's the end of my slides. Haley, do you have any more questions for me?
Yeah, so I would actually, so part of this is, I think, it's a little fraught because it sounds as though, colleges are, within the walls and they're facing inward all the time. And what we really know is that colleges are central drivers of economic development. They are engaged in any number of different things, ranging from, United Way campaigns to mayoral campaigns to gubernatorial campaigns, and they're in the mix in a way that relatively few organizations, if you look at them, really are. So I just put that out there to say that we're in no way wanting to portray that we don't have a full understanding of exactly what colleges' roles are in their communities. But from your perspective, Laura, if you were going to approach a college, tell me what you would do. If you were going to approach a college that, say, has a 15% completion rate, tell me the actual tactical steps that you'd take to go and put yourself in the community shoes, and you're going to go and approach a college president. How would you do it? What would you say? And given your experience, what would you expect the outcome to be?
Oh boy, okay, that's a tall order. But I want to actually go back to the first thing you said, Haley, because I think it's really important. It's funny to me, so I live in the college completion movement, working with hundreds of colleges that really are working so hard to improve outcomes. And so it's really interesting to be involved in CPA and see the external perspective on colleges, and to see that sometimes not everybody is involved in the completion movement. I think that I sometimes get lulled into thinking there's more going on than there is, that there are more colleges invested than there are. So I'm actually in a funny space in having this conversation, because I have to remind myself that actually I'm not working with every single college in the country, and that there are colleges that are not involved and that we need to pull along in this. So it's a really important point that there are so many colleges doing absolutely beautiful work. And there are colleges who are dramatically improving their outcomes. And I could point to, many of the winners of prizes like the Nehemiah Austin Award or the Aspen College Excellence Program, colleges that really are leaders in the nation at saying we love our students and we want better for them, and we are going to change everything about what we do. So anyway, I'm glad you said that, Haley, because I'm actually not typically on this side of the conversation. So to your point, though, if I found myself landing in another city and running a CPA lead organization, and I had a college that wasn't engaged with me but had very low completion rates, what would I do? I think I would start with just a quick, internet search around what does the college leader say in his or her message on the website about priorities? What do I know is going on locally that could be leveraged? What does the mission of this institution say it is? And how does it compare with some of its local peers? And I would craft a set of talking points to the leadership of the institution where I leveraged that information and said, you say on your college website that you're really committed to building strong career pathways into advanced manufacturing in your region. But we know that your completion rates are low, so how can we help you with that? Siemens is on my board. Can we have a conversation with them? I would really be concrete that way about this is what you've said you're trying to do, or this is what you need to do because of these, not because I'm telling you you need to, but because other people, other pressures are telling you need to do. And here's a very concrete way that I can offer you help in doing that. And then weave into that you yourself as a CPA lead organization have these goals. Here's how you're trying to do it. Here's your mission. And how can we work together in partnership? And, I would say be persistent. If you can't get to the college president, keep trying. Look for more people. I have to admit, I spend a lot of time out networking, trying to find the right person at an institution to get traction. It's a big part of this work. And, you've got to find the person who has the time, who has the energy, who is willing to say yes, and who also has the ability and authority to make decisions and make change. And so it might not be the first person you talk to, but I would really encourage you, if the first person you talk to really annoys you or is, frustrating in some way, they're just one person. They're not the culture of the organization. They are probably not even the spokesperson for the organization. And so, just keep trying until you find someone who's willing to build a relationship. And from there, I would just try to meet their needs at the same time as your own. And then the other piece of this is that, I would encourage you to talk to them about the scope of changes that they need to make, and to rely on, our understanding of the fact that pilots won't meet the challenge, that we need to be designing, at scale initiatives, that we need multiple integrated initiatives. And so, if the college says, oh, well, that's great, yeah, we have a new advising center, I would encourage you to push back and say, okay, well, what else are you doing? Because, advising's great. Advising's 100% critical, but that's not the whole equation. So how do we have a more visionary picture of how to move forward?
Right. I had a great comment from Sarah Lundqvist, who happens to be stationed at an institution in that sort of leadership role. And I think from the point you just made, the mutually beneficial, the integrated, the aligning kind of statements that we can work on that are beneficial for the community and the institution are the ones where you're going to get the most traction. And Sarah used that word authentic, which I think is actually really important as we try to think about all of our work together, is that purely bringing in a program, so one of the things that I get anxious about sometimes is taking a program and plopping it down in a place is not going to create the kind of cultural or social or cohesive kind of change we all want to see, right? It's going to feel like a program that got plopped down in your community. But finding and building agreements and collaborations that can impact the cultural kind of fabric of your institution and your community and are mutually beneficial, I think, are the best ones, right? And Sarah's been very active in the chat function, and I appreciate that, Sarah. She does come with years of experience and a keen mind for all of this. And she says that anyone outside of education, and by that I presume she means folks in those who are outside of the institutions themselves, and maybe you can comment on this, Laura, needs to be careful about credibility and the authority they have in the conversation, and whether the external partner can assure they're in it for the long term. So, I mean, taking that last statement, maybe you could just reflect on it from your experience about, what kind of credibility do you need? How do you, kind of make sure you've got the right folks sitting at the table with you if you yourself are perhaps new to higher ed, which is actually, pretty common in our group.
Yeah, it's a really that's a sticky question, and it's a great question, Sarah. Thank you. The colleges have been through a lot, and there's a lot of conversation about initiative fatigue. And so even when a college leader is running a big initiative, she might be up against her own administrators or faculty who are saying, oh, this is just, initiative of the day. What will be the new flavor next week, right? And so I think this is such a great question because, that same conversation can happen in any organization and at any level. And so, I would encourage you all to establish your credibility. I am here, I sit in the mayor's office, or I am, my board is made up of X, Y, and Z, or we are funded by X, Y, and Z. And talk about your own personal mission and the longevity of it. And that, we have a strategic plan that is a 10-year plan, and we are not going away tomorrow, because they have seen a lot of initiatives come and go. And then the question of, if you aren't a higher ed person yourself, I would seek entree via people who are in higher ed. So if you're having, some difficulty developing a relationship with one institution, but you have a really good friend at another institution, perhaps the other institution sends an email to introduce you or comes with you for the meeting, so that you're building credibility within the higher ed world. The higher ed world is, it's a very academic place. It's a very hierarchical place. Ageism is very common. And so you do have to really think about all those things and work against them and talk about, what your vision is and who's supporting you in it and how long you intend to do it. It's a great point.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say that we should never underestimate how difficult the change that we're promoting is, and I do think about it a lot, where the things that we try to promote as solutions, right, the evidence-based practices. If we look at something like what CCA is doing with structured schedules or guided pathways or co-requisite, that it's not simply the implementation of a program, right? It is the retrofitting of an entire institution and way of business and way of life that that has to change in response to this new paradigm, right? So another thing that I would just add as we start to wrap up here is to never underestimate how deep the change, how deep the change has to happen, and how many layers of onion you have to peel back to actually get to a full-blown solution. And having that kind of appreciation for the complexity of a higher education institution is never a bad thing, particularly if you're not within the institution itself. So, well, Laura, we are coming upon the 3:30 time, and I'm going to wrap it up here, but thank you so much for your time and your energy and your expertise on all of this. I'd encourage folks to reach out if you've got any questions to either Laura or me or anyone in the network who you'd like to talk to about this particular issue. We'll be developing ideas and briefs and all of that around this work because, indeed, institutions are the only ones that can grant credentials. And we have to make sure that they have the running room and the support they need to do their work, and that they are also contributing to the community level goals, because that's where they're going to get their students. So Laura, thank you, and everyone on the phone, thank you so much for participating today. This recording will be back up online in a couple days, and I'll look forward to chatting with you all soon. All right, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Haley. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.